Hello, Laine. This is my response to your paper 2. Medical cannabis, or medical marijuana, is an herbal drug that has been used to treat symptoms of certain diseases, particularly pain. The active ingredient, something, was discovered in the 1960s, and in the 80s and 90s is when the therapeutic potential of this drug was promoted. Ever since then, there has been controversy about whether or not this drug should be prescribed and used in medical practice. Excuse me. Excuse me. There are a few pharmaceutical drugs based on cannabis in its pure form, but the use of herbal cannabis is still very controversial, in part due to a lack of standardization in the products to ensure that they are safe, and in part to disagreements over legislation. With limited studies on this drug and its effects, it is difficult for it to get FDA approval and support in general from the public. Oh, that's certainly true. But I feel like you need to, excuse me, sorry. You need to mention, I'm just kind of looking forward to make sure you don't mention this soon. You certainly need to mention that part of, like the social reasons, like historically, marijuana for particular historical reasons became a drug that we classified as something that was for recreational use, and we classified as something that was that should be illegal. You don't have to unpack that whole thing, but I do think you need to mention that because that's a really important part of all this, right? I think. Medical cannabis can be consumed in one of two ways: smoking or vaporization, or in the form of something edible. That's 3 ways. I'm not meaning to be a jerk, but I think you can fix that. Okay, the article, The Level of Evidence of Medical Marijuana Use for Treating Disabilities, talks about how marijuana affects the body. THC is the primary cannabinoid in marijuana and what causes the feeling of being high. It communicates to the brain through the endocrine system, as well as the other organs, connective tissues, and glands. Its interference with the something system as a stimulant is why it promises to treat certain diseases. It can stimulate appetite in patients with eating disorders, treat nausea, and also relieve pain. Sounds good. In the United States, cultivation, possession, and consumption of cannabis is illegal, but some states have put laws in place that legalize the use of the drug medicinally. Oh, medically, you said. I don't know if that's a big difference. Okay, this state-by-state legalization. Oh my God, you're getting the most interrupted video ever! Because my cat's demanding food. Sorry. Part of the controversy comes from the fact there is no inherent difference between herbal cannabis used recreationally and that used medically. So medical cannabis is essentially just the use of the drug while being under a doctor's supervision. I think it looks kind of confusing to have that hooked up to like the comma so and hook that up to the other part of it. I don't know why. Anyway, this is a good this is a good argument for those who think this drug should not be used medicinally. It is the same as the recreational drug, which has a lot of side effects and an overall bad reputation. If a doctor has not adequately evaluated a patient, or the patient is not regularly monitored, then it is not considered medical cannabis. The parameters of it being considered medical are very strict, and it seems that patients must meet certain criteria in order to be prescribed cannabis. From what I understand, and I'm not an expert in this at all, but from what I understand, these are state laws that are different, right? So I would just add there, different states probably, or I mean, maybe they don't, but I think that different states have different parameters. Or you could just at least mention there's a possibility for it. I don't know. Just the way you said it made me think like, oh, that must be a federal thing because you're saying the parameters are strict, but as you said, it's not. Because the feds believe it, the feds consider it illegal regardless. Okay, of the 2 ways to ingest cannabis, smoking or eating, neither one has been standardized, and the effectiveness of edible cannabis hasn't yet been evaluated in any clinical trials, while the effectiveness of smoking has only been studied in small controlled trials. They don't have any trials on ingesting, sorry, is that what you said? On edibles? That's crazy. There's still a lot unknown about the side effects of cannabis, and with the lack of trials done on smoking it and eating it, it's understandable that some people may be concerned to incorporate it into the medical world as a legitimate medication. I would also assume, and maybe you're going to talk about this later too, but the reason that people haven't done studies is because they're afraid they'll spend all this money to set up the study, and then the feds will show up and be like, "You're not doing that." And also, I would guess that maybe, I mean, there's a lot of federal money that goes into research, and the federal government money isn't going to go into this. So anyway, you just might want to mention that because it sort of sounds the way you put it in there, just like, isn't this crazy? We haven't looked at it yet, but. Okay, another major concern with using medical cannabis in practice is encouraging the use of the drug recreationally, which can have many side effects that range from acute to chronic. These are things like intoxication, impaired cognition and motor function, along with anxiety, elevated heart rate, and even bronchitis from smoking the drug. Cannabis has generally a bad reputation. With the clear side effects, it could be hard to get it certified as a medication. I don't know that it has a generally bad reputation. When you're writing about these controversial issues, it's very often helpful to qualify your argument, that is to kind of cut it down, so that you're not saying this big statement, but you're saying like many people think this, or for many people cannabis has a bad reputation, right? I mean, it's hard to argue with that. That's definitely true. Because I would say especially in some states have had legalized medical marijuana for a long time now, and it seems to me like, yeah, their opinion of it is generally positive. Anyway, and the last bit about the side effects could make it hard. I mean, like, that's not really. I don't think that's really the issue. Again, I'm not an expert, but like, there are plenty of drugs that have much worse side effects than that. Anyway, moving right along. Really some smaller side issues. I.E. Hollister, who wrote an approach to the medical marijuana controversy, writes about 3 ways he believes will help to settle. 3 ways that he believes will help to settle the issue of medical marijuana use. Writes about 3 ways we may settle the issue. That sentence has too many words. I think you can cut that down and make it clear. Sometimes I do an activity with students about seeing how short they can possibly make a sentence. Like, can you say the same thing in, if you can say it in 7 words, can you say it in 6? Can you say it in 5? And that's one of the examples you could definitely cut down and have it be stronger, I think. The first thing he mentions is done more research on the effects of marijuana. He goes on to say how NIDA, I think usually I say the NIDA, don't we? As previously, when you talk about an organization like that, has previously provided funding for such trials, but does mention how, quote, such clinical trials are costly, take time, and may not be scientifically attractive to grant review committees. Again, you have to include something here about the cultural implications of marijuana. If you wanted to go deep, you could go into the racism of why you don't need to do this. But there is a lot of racism behind this moment when people realize, like, hey, the main people who use this drug are people who are from Mexico or in that part of the country near the Mexican border, and people who are black. So, whoa, this must be a bad thing. Let's cut this off. Anyway. Trials are costly. Second, he mentions how marijuana should be made available for qualified patients without having to wait for long periods of time for more studies to be done. Yeah, precedent already exists and with certain treatments are permitted on a compassionate basis before the... Yes, that's a really good point. I've really wished for that for my stepmom because she has very bad back spinal issues. Finally, he talks about how there should be exceptions for laws regarding criminal penalties for marijuana possession for those who are prescribing, supplying, or using drugs medicinally. Well, there should be, right? But we're still kind of at an impasse there. Although the article was written in 2000, the things that Hollister mentions can still be relevant as in the continuing issue of medical marijuana use. I love that you mentioned that it's in 2000 and you admit that, that's not brand new, but that it's still relevant. So I don't even care that it's not new because I'm glad the way that you addressed that was wise. Okay. The article Medical Marijuana uses characteristics in patients with chronic spine pain disorders. Oh my God! Here we go. I'm going to send this to my stepmom. Written by Emily Lindley and others, discusses the results of a study that they did to determine patterns of medical marijuana usage in patients at a spine clinic in Colorado. 200 patients at a spine surgery institution were offered enrollment in this study, and of the 184 who accepted, 83 were male and 1 were female. Why do we need to know that? Yeah, I don't think that's important, is it? 35 reported use of medical marijuana for pain, while 30 used it. Okay, see, I'm like stumbling through this. This part, I would advise you go back through and pick out, you've got a lot of numbers going on there, and I think you need to pick out exactly which ones are important and just focus on those and making those really clear, because it's kind of, yeah, this is a little confusing. And you're talking about some complex stuff, right? About like some of them have prescriptions and they used it from that. Others of them didn't have prescriptions and they used it on their own. And yeah, that's confusing. So go back through that and make it as clear as you possibly can. Okay, here's the really important part that you absolutely need. 89% of users reported that marijuana greatly or moderately relieved their pain, and 81% felt that marijuana worked better than or equal to narcotics. A large percentage of people in the study found that the use of marijuana helped them with their spinal pain, and this can be seen as great support for the argument that marijuana should be used medically. Man, I've got to get it to my stepmom, as I said. Okay. On the other hand, this is a relatively small study. I mean, like, I don't have to get it to her. I mean, I really like the government to, you know what I mean. Okay. On the other hand, this is a relatively small study, and an even smaller number of people who actually use marijuana for pain, so in order for this to be good evidence, more studies with similar results should be presented, and the argument is strengthened, sure. Also, 14% of people who took marijuana for pain reported negative side effects, things that included depressed mood, trouble concentrating, weight gain, or paranoia. So you have that sentence that starts with, or that place that starts with things, that place, where your writing is, and it says things that included depressed mood. You've written a fragment there, which you don't need to. I mean, sometimes people use fragments like for style reasons or because it will really work better. But I would suggest here, this is just pretty straight up scientific kind of writing. So you can either put a comma, reported negative side effects, comma, things that included blah, 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 or give that piece, the things piece, a beginning that will make it not be a fragment anymore. That is, you could start with something like, these side effects included blah, 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 instead of things that included, right? Which you might hear just reading it, right? It sounds like we jumped in before we even know what we're talking about. Okay, research concluded for the research we need to be sure marijuana use for chronic pain is effective. Yes. Theodore J. Wittek warns about trusting trials done on any drug and mentions who is he? I don't think you've mentioned him. So yeah, let us know who he is. And or maybe give us some more transition about like where we're going from here. Because I was like, where are we going? So for giving misleading information and presenting only selected data from a study. His point is that even if a trial claims that marijuana or any drug for that matter will help with symptoms and will cure something, it is important to be careful about that information to prevent misunderstanding about potential side effects. In 2017, the National Academies of blah, blah, blah only found 3 situations that they believed that use of marijuana would have benefits. Chronic pain in adults. It seems like that should be a lowercase c. Huh? Chronic pain in adults, multiple sclerosis-related muscle spasms. Oh my god, my uncle has MS. And treating chemotherapy, nausea, and vomiting. Wittek cites a trial done about the effects of altering the enzymes of the ITCA something, the system that marijuana has an effect on, resulted in, what he cites a trial done about the effects of this resulted, I think something's missing there, resulted in severe adverse effects and even 1 case of death. Yeah, that needs some fixing. His point is that there needs to be a lot of research done in developing a drug and fully understanding how it affects the body. Definitely. I mean, as your points go, I don't feel like that's a really... Like, I appreciate certainly that... Sorry, time check. We're almost out of time. I'm going to have to go into a second video. Hang on.